Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the webinar of the Working Group 2B on measuring impacts and communicating benefits created by SPP. My name is Irina Uzun and I'm a consultant at the UNEP Division of Technology, Industry and Economics in Paris. And without any delay, I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Farid Yaker, UNEP Program Officer in charge of the SPP program, for some welcome remarks.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone in Asia. I think that we have a participant from Korea. Hello Hyunju. We have participants from the US and some from Europe, and I'm sure we have other countries and some may join during the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. We are here to present our findings and discuss the next steps for the working group 2B, which is about measuring and communicating the outcomes of SPP. Today, we will provide you some background on the UNEP program activities, the past, the present, and future of relevance to this topic. Then Jason Pearson, Executive Director of SPLC, will give us an overview of SPLC's work and guidance, version 1.0. We believe it's important to understand this because the 2B report guidance framework is built of the same steps of the SPLC guidance document. Then Dr. Anastasia O'Rourke will walk us through the guidance framework of the Group 2B and will moderate a discussion with you on all the next steps for this line of inquiry and action. Anastasia will present some ideas and would like to hear what would be the most useful to you. We will conclude within an hour. So to start on the update of the SPP program, I'm sure that most of you know already what the objectives of the program are. Just to recall that what we aim at is to build the case for SPP. We want to improve the knowledge on SPP and show that it's an effective tool to promote greener economy and sustainable development. So the work of this group is very much in line with this objective, because we need really to convince decision makers of the usefulness of SPP, because it can show that it can produce impact on the sustainable development objectives, and we need to measure that. And second, we're working on supporting the implementation of SPP on the ground, mainly by increasing collaboration between stakeholders, but also by providing access to tools, various tools available on SPP. As of 9 September 2015, we have 83 partners in 42 different countries, and they are distributed all over the world on the 5 continents. Next one. This shows you our initial work plan, 2013-2015. You can see that we have 4 main work areas. The first one, the main one for us, is implementing SPP on the ground. But number 2 is about assessing implementation and impact. And within this work area, we have working group 2B, which focuses on measuring impacts and communicating benefits. So the work that has been done so far and led by IEC and SPLC was done in the framework of this initial biennial work plan. But we're working on the next phase, and we feel that, and UNEP is proposing that we extend this group. We believe it's an important topic, and it should be continued, and we should deepen our knowledge and comprehension of these issues. So hopefully the multi-stakeholder advisory committee will endorse the new proposal, and the working group should continue until 2017 at least. Okay, so in terms of upcoming events and next steps for the group, I'm sure Anastasia will come back to that. What we plan is to have the final report of the working group by mid-October. Then we are planning to have an expert meeting on the GHG emission reduction impacts and potentials of GPP, and this will take place in Seoul. Actually, there's a mistake. It should be in November 2015. It's 19-20 November. And in this meeting, we will prepare two side events that will take place at COP21 on the measurement of GHG emissions in public procurement. And as I said, we're planning to have a second phase of the working group 2A, actually 2B, but I can tell you that also 2A will be continued. And this will start in January 2016 until at least the end of 2017. And I'm happy to announce you that that we're working on the new edition of the global review that we do on GPP SPP, and we should start the work soon with Eco-Institute Barcelona and IEC SPLC. Okay, and I'm happy now to hand over to Jason, who will present the SPLC and the guidance document. The floor is yours.
Fareed, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm generating some echo. Could you go back one slide, please? So, sorry, we should just be looking at the SPLC logo at this point. So I just want to quickly introduce SPLC, which is a big tent initiative, a multi-stakeholder, multi-sector space in which members can collaborate to develop a shared program for guiding, measuring, and recognizing leadership in sustainable purchasing. Since our founding 2 years ago, we've grown to over 200 member organizations representing purchasers, suppliers, and public interest advocates across government, private sector, and civil society. Next slide. We are excited by a shared opportunity. Just in the US alone, we estimate that institutional purchasing, that is purchasing that is professionally managed as part of the operations of an organization, represents $10 trillion in economic demand. And this is the largest, most concentrated, professionally managed economic demand signal focusing the forces of market innovation. And of that demand, about maybe a fifth to a quarter of it is government purchasing. So we see public procurement as an important component of a larger economic signal that's being sent. All of our members are seeking to shape their part of that economic demand so that it sends consistent signals to advance a sustainable future. The challenge in the center of this slide that our members have faced is that purchasers currently lack shared resources to build a robust strategy and avoid duplication of efforts, with the result that suppliers face multiple different but similar market signals as they seek to differentiate their offerings. SPLC exists to create a shared program across government, private sector that guides leadership action and aligns market signals to encourage and reward innovation for a positive future. Next slide. Earlier this year, we released our guidance for leadership in sustainable purchasing, which is a 200-page handbook for strategic sustainable purchasing that walks a purchasing organization through the process of creating and running a strategic sustainable purchasing program. Next slide. As Fareed mentioned, the framework for measuring and communicating benefits of sustainable public procurement is designed to align with this guidance version 1.0. And the diagram that I'm showing you now represents the organization of our guidance. On the left side of the diagram, Chapter 2 of the guidance version 1.0 includes an explanation of how to create a strategic sustainable purchasing program in 4 steps: preparing a vision for the program, enlisting support, designing the program, and getting commitment to that program at leadership levels. On the right of the diagram, Chapter 3 of the guidance explains how to run a strategic sustainable purchasing program using a series of strategy cycles, each of which involves 6 key steps: launching a strategy, analyzing and prioritizing potential actions, planning the strategy, getting commitment to the strategy from appropriate areas in the organization, implementing the strategy, and reporting on challenges in effective measurement and communication of sustainable public procurement benefits may involve taking actions throughout this process, and therefore we have proposed organizing the framework for measuring and communicating the benefits of sustainable public procurement around this process, around the 4 steps on the left associated with creating a strategic sustainable purchasing program, and the 6 steps on the right involved in running a strategy cycle, a series of strategy cycles in the process, in the course of running a strategic sustainable purchasing program. So as Anastasia presents the framework, keep this larger frame in your mind. We're trying to present the frame for measuring and communicating benefits in the context of this ongoing process of leadership in sustainable purchasing within large organizations. I'll stop there to give Anastasia the most time to actually present the framework.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Farid and Jason. And what I'm going to do today is walk through a little bit of background about the 2B project, remind you where we're up to, talk about a few key concepts and definitions, and then walk through the guidance steps. At the end of that, what we want to do is talk about what are the next steps for this project. What could they be? What would you like to see? We'll propose a few ideas, and that will help inform our thinking for next year's work on this topic, as well as just perhaps anyone's work on this topic of what we see as still needing to be done. Just as a background, we did set up this project hypothesis at the beginning of the project, which is that sustainable public procurement practices will actually increase if there's a reliable way of measuring and communicating the sustainability benefits of SPP programs. Another reminder, next slide please. This project ran since October 2014 till now. Here we are today at the presentation of findings, and as Farid mentioned, we will be publishing, or UNEP will be publishing, a report in mid-October which contains this material. We conducted a baseline analysis, which was a fairly extensive literature review and practice review of examples, calculators, methodologies, key concepts, barriers, many different topics in that baseline analysis of how one actually can think about measuring outcomes of sustainable public purchasing. We ran an expert workshop in Washington, D.C. in January, where we got input on an initial sort of conceptual framework and decided at that meeting and soon thereafter how we wanted to work on this framework, how we wanted to structure it. At that time, we went into developing the framework guidance, which, as Jason mentioned, we decided to structure it pretty closely aligned to the SPLC guidance, which had just come out, the version 1.0 of SPLC's guidance, as it seemed like it was a very good both opportunity and addition to that guidance to really talk specifically about measurement and about communication of benefits. We did some piloting of that framework over the summer. I'll explain the brief results of those pilots, which perhaps were not as extensive as we'd hoped, but we did get some good feedback there. And here we are today presenting the findings, and we will share the report shortly. Next slide, please. So I'm mainly going to focus on the framework development and then the framework itself. So as I said, we did this baseline review. As part of that, we developed a concept map. We also looked closely at the SPLC guidance version 1.0, and we had the good timing of being able to work off of the working group 2A's guidance, which came out around the same time. So we were able to really look at their recommendations for measuring and monitoring implementation of SPP, which is of course a step, one step that's an important step in between measuring outcomes. So from that we created the guidance. Next slide, please. And here are some key concepts and definitions. If you could click again. This is an animated slide, so one more click. Thank you. So how do we actually measure SPP? I mean, we can look at policies, we can look at actual activities, and we can look at outcomes from those activities. So Some of the measurement-related work of the UNEP 10YFP SPP program is along the bottom there. The global review of SPP is looking at the sort of what national policies exist, what programs exist, and so on, and then the types of activities that organizations, in this case government organizations, are doing. And there you can start to measure and evaluate different processes using a method, if you like, called process evaluation, where you're really measuring outputs and progress towards the goals that are being set. And that's really the topic of the 2A working group. Now, if you try to then translate that into outcomes, this is where we get into trying to measure what are the impacts and the benefits that are ultimately being achieved by some of these program activities. And that's where our working group was focused. Next slide, please. So a few more key measurement concepts. I think we're jumping back. Yes, one back, please. Key measurement concepts. So SPP activities include spend analysis, policy development, specification development, RFP language development, that kind of thing. If you wouldn't mind going back one slide, I think we skipped one. Thank you. Outputs and embedment type indicators include things like, does the organization have a sustainability policy, some sort of guidance, some sort of specifications that they're using? Have RFPs had sustainability criteria built in? Have they integrated any SPP program or specifications, for example, into e-procurement systems? So these are just examples of things you may measure. Next slide. You may want to measure some intermediate outcomes from that. So an example of that would be, say, the number of contracts that meet sustainability policies, or get straight into longer term outcomes. So here, this is the topic of 2B, where we're measuring more sustainable goods and services that have been purchased, and what does that lead to? We've divided in this guidance up between internal benefits and external benefits. So internal, we're defining as those benefits that are enjoyed by the purchasing organization, things like cost savings, revenue growth, or risk reduction. Something that really the benefit is comes back to that organization making those decisions, whereas external benefits are more public goods, social welfare benefits, and these can be environmental, they can be social, they can be economic, but they're broader than just the organization itself. So that's a key concept. Next slide. So as Jason mentioned, the SPLC guidance version 1.0, when we read it, when it came out, we said, look, there are measurement concepts happening. Measurement work happens at each of these steps. And of course, that is included in the guidance. But we said, what can we take from that and say, if you were to take the same framework and these same steps, what should you do at each of these steps in order to develop measurements for outcomes and outputs of your SPP program? And so what I'm going to do now is walk through exactly those steps. So the guidance framework that we developed for the 2B project follows each of these steps in turn. And I'll walk through briefly each of them. Next slide, and then the one after. Okay, so as you can see here, the way I've set up these slides is following these steps very directly. So at the prepare stage, this is where we suggest that you choose benefit categories that your organization cares about. Mapping out what are relevant to your organization, its mission, its stakeholders, policies that are in place. Do you want to focus just on environmental impacts, focus on economic and or social as well? And then we also recommend to look at whether there are already SPP initiatives in place and that may inform a sort of future vision for this measurement work. Next slide. So this is a side note, and in the guidance we provide some details on these, but these are some potential benefits of SPP grouped into environmental, social, economic, just so that you can see the types of measures that we're talking about. So in environmental, reduced greenhouse gas emissions perhaps, or improved air quality, the biodiversity is maintained. Social benefits are things like creating employment opportunities, social inclusiveness, promoting fair and ethical trade, supporting small and medium enterprises. Oftentimes, many government organisations actually already have all sorts of programs and policies in place to support these social benefits. What we found through the work, through the 2B project, as well as what the SPLC has found, is that actually they're sometimes classified as sustainability and sometimes they're not. And so it's worth taking a look at what already exists there in the social realm, because oftentimes there are in fact policies and programs that could be incorporated into a broader sustainability agenda. On the economic side, obviously reducing cost is clear internal benefit to that organisation, but more broadly promoting innovation, regional economic development, and new markets, developing markets for sustainable products and services, which by taking an early adopter approach can really help innovation of more sustainable products and services get into the marketplace. Next slide. So at the enlist step, here we recommend that organisations ask, well, what types of communications will resonate with different audiences, and really collect input from them, if you're able to, on the importance of the various measures of benefits that you're thinking about doing. So doing a check in with the broader group, basically, following that initial preparation. Next slide. In the design step, we are proposing that organisations use a logic model. I'll define that in a minute, to look at setting up program level metrics. Take a look at and do a preliminary analysis of what data sources and tracking systems you have in place already, or that you may need to develop to gather data, so that you can do some of those measurements. And at this step, really lay the foundation for a later sort of program evaluation by thinking through what are your baselines going to be. So if you're trying to measure progress towards a goal, what is your starting point? What outcomes do you really expect? What evidence do you think you're going to need to make that case? And if you think there's any need for some sort of external validation or checking of those results, that can vary. Next slide. So a side note about what do we mean by this logic model, in case it's not already a known term to you. This is really coming from program evaluation methodologies, where it's essentially a graphic showing how a program is supposed to work. Oftentimes this is called a theory of change in the NGO and foundation world. But basically you're mapping out what activities you're going to do, which will lead to different outputs, and then from that different outcomes. So there's an example here where an activity could be to design specifications or RFP language for energy efficient IT products. That's just an example, which should lead to an increased purchase of energy efficient IT products. So that would be an output. And then we have here two different outcomes. So one outcome could be that there is reduced greenhouse gases produced, because we're now using less energy per unit of IT products bought by the agency. And a second outcome could be that there is a more robust marketplace now for energy sufficient IT products that other customers can buy, that other organizations can buy. So you're having a more transformative market effect. So that's what we mean by a logic model, and we're saying try to set up a logic model or a sort of steps through how you expect to achieve those outcomes and those benefits early on, so that you can clearly map the districts. Next slide. At the commit step, it's a small little step there in the diagram, but it's actually quite important. Here we want to ensure that, you know, we're committing to measuring and reporting on benefits, as well as doing the implementation activities or setting up the policies, and to use the results of that measurement, moreover, when they come back in as part of some sort of a continuous improvement cycle, if you will. Next slide. So here we're getting into the second part of the SPLC guidance structure, which Jason mentioned goes as a strategy cycle. So I'll just walk through it once. But the launch phase here, there's many suggestions in the SPLC guidance about what different meeting agendas should look like, what you should do as part of a launch, and we just suggest that this should include a plan and a budget for measuring and communicating results. Obviously, that's helpful to have some resources put into this. It's not easy necessarily to do this work. Next slide, please. When we get to analysing, the analyse step within the SPLC guidance strongly recommends doing spend analysis using a couple of different techniques, and this spend analysis we think can be used for two purposes. One, to inform prioritization of which product categories or service categories you want to focus on. So that is something SPLC guidance strongly recommends. In addition, you can use that spend analysis and that data to inform, to set up a measurement baseline for later measurement, because you're taking essentially a snapshot of what your purchasing profile is today, what your organization is actually buying in which categories, and that can be very helpful data for their measuring progress against what you're achieving there. Next slide. At the planning stage, we're recommending defining the scope and level of measurement activities in more detail. At this point, you are selecting different, in the SPLC guidance at that point, you're identifying and selecting proven strategies for mitigating your impacts. And this is the point where you want to really nail down the exact metrics and data sources that you are going to use to measure benefits, and developing an actual plan for who is going to collect this data and how are you going to report it. Next. Another commitment step in here, which we just suggest to include a commitment to measuring and reporting outcomes of each of these strategies that are chosen. Next step is the implementation step, and here for each of the priority strategy that's implemented, that's chosen, you're identifying the key indicators and metrics. I'll explain SMART in 1 minute. Establish a baseline for each of the metrics, and do a check on data quality as you're doing implementation, correcting errors as you go along. As we all know, these sometimes are big sources of diffuse data. It's always good to check the data quality as you go along. Next slide. Quick side note on what we mean by SMART performance indicators. That's an acronym standing for specific, measurable, actionable, results-based, realistic, and time-bound performance indicators. I'm not going to walk through each of them in the interest of time, but it's a fairly typical way of characterizing different performance indicators. Okay, next slide, and we're almost there. Reporting and communication steps. We want to think about both what to communicate when we have some results and to whom. So who is the real audience? On the what to communicate side, you may want to communicate progress on each of the strategies chosen, so each of those implementation activities. And then you could think about just reporting out on each of them, or aggregate them up to a program level kind of outcome. You could contextualize the benefits that you've achieved, for example, using social math. So social math is things like when you say, and this is equivalent to 1,000 cars being taken off the road, or this is equivalent to a certain number of swimming pools, 100 swimming pools of water were saved, things like that. Just to give people more of a sense of the scale of what you're actually achieving can be very helpful in communications. Here you could consider benchmarking your results. So this could be an internal benchmark between different agencies or different departments, or you could try to benchmark against other countries or other equivalent agencies in other regions. We include in the guidance quite a discussion about attribution, and that means can you actually attribute the measures and the outcomes that you're talking about to your activities, or were there intervening factors that could have explained that? So just keep an eye on that, and I don't want to go into it in a lot of detail here, but some of the techniques from the program evaluation literature can be very helpful in making those attributions, doing so carefully. For some agencies, this is incredibly important to make very clear, direct connections between the benefits that are being achieved in their programs, and for others, it doesn't matter in quite so much detail exactly how, but one way or the other, you want to make sure that you're being careful about attribution and know what you're claiming. And on the communication side, to whom you're communicating, you may want to have different types of communication for different audiences. Okay, next slide. A couple of extra steps which I believe SPLC is going to take into account in its next revision of its guidance that we suggest, and it's implied in the SPLC guidance already, is to really use the results of the benefits that you're measuring in a continuous improvement cycle. It can help inform to take on new SPP strategies and new cycles, so which new product categories, if you like, do you want to focus on. It can also be, these results can also be a management tool to inform broader or higher level organization and business planning, and to moreover inform policy. Okay, next slide. Now, I've finished the walkthrough of the guidance, and thank you for your attention while I did that. A brief step into what we did on the pilot over the summer, and then I will get into sort of recommended steps and questions and comments from you all. So the pilot goals were really to test out this framework guidance that we've developed and get some structured feedback from people on how to improve and refine it. And thirdly, to identify areas for future research and work on this topic. So we did two types of pilot, which I'm going to report on today. The low engagement pilot, which was essentially a questionnaire sent to our working group and some others to give us structured feedback, as I mentioned, and a higher engagement pilot where we're actually starting to look at some results of some outcomes measurements, which we're just completing now with Ketty as our high engagement pilot partner. Next slide. So here is just a list of the 14 different respondents who took the time, and thank you very much for doing this. For those of you who are on this webinar, to both read over the guidance and then give us step-by-step feedback on what they liked, what they didn't like, what they thought could be improved, and how. We had a good representation from many different countries there, which was very nice for us. Next slide. So overall, the feedback that we received was very positive, and most of the suggestions were more refinements on some of the concepts, rather than sort of wholesale, you need to revise this completely type of comment. So that was good for us, and we just represented here one of the questions where we asked sort of relative to other issues in SPP, how important is this topic? And the majority of people said it's very important, we need to focus on it. Obviously, this is a self-selecting group who answered this survey, but still we think that it confirms somewhat that our view that this is an important topic, that perhaps it's not absolutely top of the list, but it is considered very important to focus on measurement and communication of outcomes. Next slide. Here I would like to just walk through some of the sections that people found most helpful in what I just presented now and in the framework guidance, which is Section A about preparing the vision, Section G about planning, Section I about implementation. Then actually two of the appendices were considered very helpful. One was a big table mapping out the landscape of different methods and available calculators that can be used to do some of this this work, and Appendix B with the list of the actual calculators that are available. Next slide. So those are going to be included in the final report. Sorry, go back a slide if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. The pilot respondents also suggested some improvements. Can you go back 2 slides, please? Thank you. The suggested that the Appendix B is some more work is needed onto that to really explain what are these different methods, what are their pros and cons of those methods, how do you actually use them, when is it appropriate to use them. Some others suggested that this guidance is very generic. It's meant to cut across many different countries as well as many different sizes and types of organizations. It really be more helpful to have some sort of adaptations of this guidance more specific to particular regions or types of organizations. A couple of suggestions to simplify this a little bit, especially for those who are newer to SPP. It can be a little bit complex. A strong suggestion from nearly everyone to provide more case examples and illustrations, both short and long, throughout the text as well as in sort of associated case studies. There was some advice provided on gathering data using existing e-procurement platforms. So what they would like is advice on doing that. And then to look more closely, perhaps as a research effort into the social benefits metrics and methodologies in particular, which are just less known to this particular audience. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to walk quickly through the recommended next steps that we can come up with and that gleaned in part from what the pilot respondents suggested as well. And then we'd like to open it up for discussion with you all, questions as well, and then we'll close out at the hour. So this is just one slide, so you'll be glad to know this is my final slide. How can we progress this work further? So this will be outside the particular setup of this 2B project as it stands this year, but as Farid Yako mentioned, that there is plans to do more work on this topic by UNEP and program partners next year as well, and other organizations may want to take on pieces of this also. So we do see that further research and methodology development is needed. As I mentioned on social benefits, looking into applications of some of the methods we list in that appendix, providing more guidance and sort of testing of some of those methods. Providing some more detailed how-to guidance at different steps on measuring economic benefits, measuring and communicating greenhouse gas emissions reductions. In particular, there's a strong policy support for an interest in that topic right now, leading up to the COP at the end of this year, but also more broadly than that. And some more guidance on really effectively gathering and analyzing data, spend data, outcomes data. Can be a challenging task with very big national governments who purchase across many different agencies. So some more examples and guidance on how to do that could be fruitful. And I think that crosses over with some recommendations that came out of the Working Group 2A group as well. And they do provide some of that guidance, so perhaps we need to match that in here as well, bring the two together. So the third point, the third cluster of recommended next steps would be to further test and adapt this framework guidance into the SPLC guidance and rating system, the next version of the SPLC guidance, and as Jason mentioned, from SPLC's point of view, as it starts to move towards developing a rating system of sustainable purchasing, a key piece of that will be measuring the outcomes of those programs. So we can certainly use pieces of this framework guidance in that work and take it as an input to that, to the development of that rating system. Doing further work with and alongside the 2A workgroup guidance, perhaps looking at that country or regional adaptations or testing this or creating guidance around this measurement of outcomes for different types of agencies, so smaller local ones, regional, state, and then national. And then, as I mentioned, there's a strong interest in collecting and sharing best practices and case examples of this work. We did, in fact, do a search for such examples as part of our baseline review. We found some, but not that many. So I think there's a need to develop those further. We think that, in fact, there is quite a lot going on. People have just not necessarily documented and published them. So we'd like to encourage people to do that, and perhaps the UNEP program can be a good clearinghouse for that, as can SPLC and other organizations working in this space. Okay, so at this point, Irina, I'm going to hand it back to you and Farid to open up for questions and any comments. So first of all, perhaps we can take questions first.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Anastasia. We collected some questions that I sent to you. If you can check the chat box, otherwise we can read them out loud.
Okay, I am just looking at them right now, so give me...
We have many questions from...
Well, there's first one for, I believe, for SPLC guidance relationship with the new ISO standard on sustainable procurement. Perhaps that's a question for Jason to answer.
Sure. Happy to respond to that. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. SPLC has been participating in the development of the new ISO standard, and we have an ongoing relationship with the group that is developing that standard. So the objectives on both sides are to maintain alignment between the guidance that we are developing and the ISO standard. They do have some very similar components. First, both the ISO standard and the SPLC guidance use an approach that encourages an organization to set priorities and consider the organizational context of those priorities. They both also recommend the approach of mapping spend to sustainability impacts. The ISO standard takes the approach of organizing procurement functions towards sustainability and integrating sustainability into the procurement process, which is one part of the overall process that we recommend. That is, the ISO standard tends to focus on the procurement function within the organization, whereas SPLC tends to ask, look, based on the consequences of an organization's spending, what are the actions that an organization can take, whether within the procurement department or outside of the procurement function, to address the consequences of that spending and also to seize opportunities for benefits within that spending. At this point, the ISO standard gets into more detail on contract management that we have to date and more into the mechanics of supplier selection, but those are areas that we are looking to strengthen in the future.
Okay, thank you, Jason.
Right, so
we have more questions
from Irina.
Yeah, from Basilio. I'm going to unmute him. But I can't. Okay. Anastasia, can you please read the question? Because, yeah, them, but not...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's more efficient. So one part of the question is we're being asked, are you suggesting to use financial indicators to measure success of SPP programs in order to motivate organizations to adopt them? The answer is yes, but not only financial indicators. As we said, economics, financial indicators, one set of indicators, and those are obviously measuring things that organization can capture those benefits directly oftentimes, and then environmental and social benefits are often motivating as well, and linked directly to policy goals. There's another question about transnational corporations adopting sustainable purchasing practices in their headquarters, but not necessarily in other countries that they operate. We actually do not consider that as part of this guidance and this framework guidance, because this is really focused on national governments or in government agencies. But I think that certainly a question for national government agencies or any agency, any organization is how far, how inclusive do you want to make your policy and implementation strategy? Is it for the whole organization, components of the organization? Do you want to claim outcomes relating to all of them or just for that particular entity for which you've done the measurement? I think that certainly some of the framework guidance we've developed here could be applied to other types of organizations beyond governments. Some of the policy language you may want to shift, but perhaps that could be one of the future iterations of this guidance in the future. A question from David Sorokin in the US EPA, who asked, should measuring outcomes only focus on benefits? What about costs? Good question, David. For example, he writes higher priced products with sustainability attributes. In fact, we do talk about costs in there as if you're going to measure, particularly on the economic side, measuring economic benefits, looking at what are the economic costs and then showing a delta of those. Sometimes that can be hard to measure, but all of this can be hard to measure. I believe that that is something that we would like to in the future look more closely at developing a bit more guidance on exactly how to do that on that economic benefit side, and benefits and costs, and make that part of the equation, if you like. So important point there, because you want to be realistic about what you're actually presenting and make sure that you're capturing the full scope of the economic benefits there. Another question. Okay, I think
Anastasia, may I just add to that briefly?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Jason.
Just on David's question, I would also say that there is from SPLC's perspective, there is a reason why this project was scoped toward benefits, that is to look at measuring and communicating the benefits. And I think the reason for that is that procurement departments, procurement professionals generally are very comfortable with assessing the costs and with finding ways to reduce costs. And that's work that has been their stock and trade for many years. And the work of sustainable public procurement or sustainable purchasing more generally is often to help purchasing professionals and procurement departments to understand the opportunities that they have to add value for the organizations in ways that may not have been historically part of their role within the organization. So I think that this idea that the procurement function within an organization can add value for the organization and that there are benefits to taking actions related to procurement that will advance the mission of a government agency or will advance the mission of a corporation is a relatively new perspective, but in order for that perspective to be valid, we have to be able to demonstrate and measure and communicate those benefits. So from SPLC's perspective, we see this project as building that part of the equation, which can then be integrated with the long-standing familiarity of procurement professionals with cost analysis and cost reduction in order to build that broader case that Anastasia was referencing.
Thanks. So are there any other suggestions beyond the ones that have... Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to add something on the previous question.
Yes.
Yes, I think why are we focusing on benefits is mainly because initially our aim was to really highlight the impacts that SPP could have on sustainable development parameters, because this is initially why authorities, public procurement, procuring entities engage SPP activities, really because they want to have an impact either on carbon emissions or on pollutions, on air quality, or on social parameters. So really what we're asking to do, what we're being asked to do is really to provide data to decision makers so that they can really argue and they can demonstrate the benefits of SPP policies. They're investing money into SPP, but the problem is that we're not able for the moment to measure the impacts and the benefits of these policies. So that's why there is this initial focus. But you will notice, maybe if you look at the slide we proposed for Action Plan 2015-2017, that we have a new group now that's being called, that's actually numbered 3A, which is going to deal with the life cycle costing and cost-benefit analysis of sustainable public procurement. So hopefully we're going to link those two aspects. On the one hand, the benefits of SPP, and the other hand, the cost, because what we're being asked now is really to provide evidence that it is more interesting to purchase sustainable or green products than conventional products. So we have to come up with these arguments and metrics to make the case. And this goes to, we have to show on the one hand that the cost can be reduced, especially if we internalize externalities, and on the other hand that we have benefits not only for the organization but also for society. So we're going to be working on this topic of global costs on LCC, etc., and hopefully then the 2B and 3A will be able to collaborate towards this goal.
Thank you, Farid. I would just like to know if there are other questions or comments now on what else should be done on this topic in the future.
Anastasia, I just sent you another question from Bazir.
Okay. There was a question, would you kindly elaborate on EIO LCA and spend analysis? I could, but I think it would take longer than what we have left here. EIO LCA is Economic Input Output Life Cycle Assessment, and if you can access the SPLC guidance version 1.0, there is quite an explanation there of spend analysis. Essentially, it is taking and analyzing your spending as an organization, and then by product category or taking a common classification system, mapping and modeling what are the life cycle impacts of that in environmental terms using this technique EIO LCA. So there is more guidance out there on that topic, and I hope that you have a chance to read that. There was another question that came in about how will the adaptation of specific countries of the guidance be dealt with. At this point, the answer is, well, it's a suggestion to do so. I'm not sure if we have program funding to do so. I think that's more of a question for UNEP, whether that's of particular interest. Certainly anything that is contained in this guidance, once we publish it, can be taken and adapted at will by any country. It's open, it's a public resource now. We'd be really happy to see it being used in all sorts of different contexts, but I'm not sure if there's going to be a program around that topic. We have another question here from David Sorokin again about some programs allowing a premium spend for green products, i.e. that they're able to spend a little bit more to advance other economic benefits, and David, you were right, that is in fact true. So in those cases, I think then the point is to say what benefits are being really achieved by that or expected by that little bit extra, and put some numbers around that. Yes, Farid?
Yeah, no, we had unmuted David, so if he wants to provide...
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Go ahead, David.
I'm not sure I have a working microphone. Can you hear me?
You do.
Yes.
We hear you well.
Oh, okay. Good. I just wanted to make the point that about the premium spend, that sometimes there is a very clear-cut additional cost to this type of sustainable purchasing, and in advocating and communicating about the benefits, I think we just need to be honest and upfront about the cost aspects as well. That was the only point I was really making.
Okay, great.
Right. That's
well, we're coming up to the end of the hour.
Analysis is important, I think. Yeah.
Right, cost-benefit analysis. If you wouldn't mind putting the next slide, it just has some email addresses of Farid Yaka, Jason Pearson, and myself, Anastasia Roll. We're looking forward to receiving any other comments or thoughts and ideas. I would just like to close by thanking you all for joining us today, as well as thanking those of you who participated in the working group for your great comments and participation throughout this in the pilot, in various other webinars we've run in sending us comments. I would also like to thank UNEP, KETI, ICLEI, the 10-way SPP program for supporting this work, and SPLC for being our partner in that. The 2A Eco Institute group, the 2A work group led by Eco Institute, who we coordinated with this on. And Farid, back to you to say any other final closing words.
Yes, thanks. And it's my turn now to thank you, Jason and Irina, for setting up this great webinar. We had a very good audience with a number of questions. I want to thank those of you that participated from the US, from Canada. A number of colleagues came from Brazil. We had a very good participation from China, even though it's quite late there, so the subject is really of interest to them. We had, I mentioned Korea. We had a representative from OECD, from the Convention on Biodiversity, and from Sweden. So we're really happy to have you here. I mean, all of you in this webinar, and we are ourselves in Paris with a very sunny, nice and sunny weather. So thank you, and I hope you will be participating in the next phase of the working group, and we look forward to your participation because we need to really progress on this path towards better measurement of impacts, but also into taking consideration the cost aspect. Thank you, and we see you soon. Bye-bye.